So let's begin. We're fortunate to have fours that have a great deal of knowledge about being a four. So I've been asked to always begin with a summary overview. And I want to first just have each panelist introduce themselves. And then I will do the summary overview. And then I'll be asking the panelists what they feel is true for them. And as they answer, if I happen to notice that their answer has a lot to do with their tritype or their instinctual stacking, or what, let's say, someone with their type or tritype or the order of their tritype, I'm going to mention it because it's very helpful. And I think one way that we have been confused listening to people on panels is that we don't always know those details. And they may use words that might be puzzling because you think, well, wait a minute, that type, fours don't say that they have any kind of fears. They'll say their version of concerns. But actually, if the four has 6 in the tritype, they do. So if that comes up, I'll mention it. So it'll be a teaching panel for those of you who have not seen one of my panels before. Welcome to I want to say on all fours, because for years I taught a class on all fours, but this is the 4 panel that's in particular focused on the original intent of Ichazo and then later Naranjo's additions. I recently went back and found my notes of when I was with Naranjo and Ichazo. One in 1996, that was Naranjo, and 2005, that was Ichazo, where I did a week-long intensive with both of them. And it triggered so much of what the mistyping is all about. And this began because there were quite a few people that just didn't really understand type 2 or the deeper qualities of all the types. So I'm going to focus on what was intended in terms of the defense strategy or the inner experience as opposed to behaviors. So those of you who don't know the types very well, you can easily mistype if you look at behaviors. And for those of you that might be a 6, you're meant to look at behaviors. And it's very difficult for a 6 and for some 9s to find themselves because their defense strategy is designed to have you think of everything in terms of circumstances or the situation. And actually, it's very, very, very rare. Doing tens of thousands of tests with the Enneastyle questionnaire, and then now tens of thousands of interviews. 6s don't type as 6s. They type as what they think they need to be, could be, should be, or have become. So you can take my test at EnneagramTritypeTest.com. And version 8 is now available. All right. So, Sterling, how long have you known the Enneagram? And did you ever mistype? Or did others ever see you as a different type?
So I've known the Enneagram for, I guess, 20 years now. Shortly, I was a senior in high school when I first picked up my first Enneagram book. So it's been about 20 years. Initially, whenever I found the Enneagram, I did mistype as a 1. I was reading through 1, and I recognized the sort of, I think what I really related to was the kind of frustration and irritability that I read in the description of 1. And then also the need to, there was always kind of a need to improve, or at least what I was interpreting as a need to improve, that really was, I later realized was just a sort of need to uncover all the layers of myself. And I definitely never wanted any part of myself to be hidden from myself. That's like a horrifying thought to me. So I did initially mistype as a 1, and then quickly, that was back when it was the Don and Russ's book, the personality types, and they still had integration, disintegration in there, and I was like, well, I wonder why I relate so much to the 1 going to 4. Like, am I that? Like, what's the problem? And then I realized, oh, I'm actually a 4. And then I started to read 4, and it was like, that whole gut punch feeling of like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the early personality types, it was about the self-pres 4 also. And many 4s, especially if they're sexual, and if they have 1, they tend to identify with 1. It reinforces that 1-4 line. So if you're a frustrated 4, and all 4s are, but it's a little more kind of relentless in the way you would attack yourself, then 4s will type as a 1. The main difference is that the 4 continues on and they feel very self-conscious, whereas even the most introverted 1 feels they're right, or they believe they don't say anything unless they're right, or if they're critical, it's to help someone. Very common.
Yeah.
It's the only type actually that 4s mistype as, unless they happen to be the 4, 7, 9, and then they might identify with the 9 or the 7.
Yeah. So I never thought I was any other type, and it didn't take long. Maybe a couple of months, and then I was like, it didn't. Something about it just didn't match, and then I finally delved into 4, and it everything sort of clicked into place. So yeah, always kind of knew. For the most part, I always kind of knew I was a 4, and then instinct and stacking and Tritype shifted, as through the years. I've been working with you for a long time, but then everything kind of landed and made sense. Once everything clicks into place, it really does. It makes a huge difference in terms of,
It does. Refinements, even if they come years apart, really can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sterling. Patty, how long have you known the Enneagram?
Well, I've been a seeker all my life, but the Enneagram is relatively new to me. I've known about it for about 3 years and ran across it via one of those Enneagram for Dummies books.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what?
That orange one, yeah. What?
Well, the Enneagram for Dummies, I think is what it's called, Herb, right? Herb wrote it. If it was,
I don't remember the author, but it was one of those, kind of a thin book. And, Enneagram is such a weighty subject. And it had a picture, the way I typed myself was it had a picture of an artist, and I'm an artist. And so that made a lot of sense to me. So I self-identified very quickly because it had this little picture of an artist for the 4. But I must say, being a classically trained artist, that I'd say at least half of the artists that I know are not 4s. So that wasn't maybe the best reason to think I'm a 4. But since I've been studying with you in particular the last almost a year and a half, I see, and especially since I've been learning how to type people in a more sophisticated way with you, I see the value of knowing your type, your correct type, and also the instincts and all of that. So it's been a really great experience for me because I've been in therapy for so long, most of my adult life. And I find the Enneagram to be just a much more elegant and effective way to be self-reliant with my seeking and my personal growth.
Great. Now, did you ever identify with another type, even momentarily? Because these are good patterns for people coming into the Enneagram to see what matches up with them.
No.
Okay.
No.
I never did either, but thank you. Rodney, if you'd be so kind. Our social 4.
I'm Rod, 468, and social and sexual, heavily social. I'm the speaker of the social, for the group. And I've been known the Enneagram for about 25 years. I'm a psychiatrist by profession, and it has been a lot of my thinking, part of my thinking for the last 25 years. I've always very quickly saw myself as a 4. I've gone through some interesting stages through there. There was a brief period of time I wondered about the 8 in me, and so I remember going through that period. I went through a period of time where it's still funny to think about it. I actually wondered if I was more 9-ish. Actually, there is an aspect of 9 that's kind of part of my professional persona. So it's a kind of a defense strategy, but one that feels very comfortable to me. But I'm anything but a 9. I'm anything but a 9. So, I've worked with Katherine for about the past, I've known Katherine's work for several years, and have worked with her the last couple of years. And 468 is definitely who I am.
Yeah, that's for sure. And social version.
Social 468, right.
Thank you. So I'll read the summary description now. 4s believe that to have value and personal significance, they must be original, unique, and authentic. They see themselves as refined, tasteful, deep, and introspective. 4s dislike uniformity and regulation. They are attracted to aesthetics, creativity, and putting their personal stamp or mark on things. And I would take it a step further with aesthetics and say that 4s need beauty. They don't just like it, they need it as a part of their lives. In fact, when I first created the boards of the 9 types, I had beauty on the 4 because I'd received so many 4s telling me that word was very critical to what was innately important to them. And when a friend of mine was putting together what I'd received for the Tritypes, beauty wasn't on every 4 Tritype. And 4s would say, well, I really identify more with this Tritype, but I need beauty. And then they would negate the Tritype that they actually were. And that alerted me even more how significant beauty is to the 4. So I arranged for beauty to be on all the collages. And there are other words that are just as important to the other types. Like with the 8, power has to be on every single Tritype, or a word like power, or the 8s will choose the one that says power on it. So how do you relate to that, Miriam? Whether it's the beauty or the personal significance, a lot of people don't like to talk about being unique anymore because it's such a buzzword for the 4, but it's still a great adjective. And this need to be tasteful. In fact, when I showed my research to Naranjo in 96 on the instincts, he had read an article I wrote on people's persona, their presentation and style, their image presentation and style. And he noticed the word tasteful was in there, and he just thought it was perfect for type 4. Even with English as a second language, he knew that was critical, which is also a reference to aesthetics and beauty, but it can just be a type of creativity. What about you, Sterling? Whether it's the personal significance, the originality, the authenticity, your personal stamp, or like tasteful. I love that word because I had not heard it before. And as I shared, Naranjo liked it. And then it was in a later revised version of his book that I didn't notice till sometime last year. I thought, oh, he actually put it in there.
Yeah, I do relate very strongly to needing beauty. And I mean, I remember it even as a child that there was always this need for me to feel, I used to go outside in my grandmother's garden, and because it was beautiful, and make myself cry. It was weird. But it was this like need to create, but it was because it was beautiful, right? And I could always create that around me. Or if I wasn't in a space that was beautiful, then that's where the frustration and the anger and that sort of vitriol would come out. I would be very picky about if we'd go on vacation and the hotel room wasn't beautiful or elegant the way that, even as a child, like I would, I wasn't comfortable because it didn't match what I thought.
Didn't hear what you needed.
Yeah. And then as I sort of aged and got through, adolescence and, young adulthood and now adulthood, I see how beauty, as embarrassing as it is, I've realized that there's a part of me that wants to be beautiful. Like I want to be regarded as such. Dancer, ballet dancer now, which I didn't pick up till I was an adult, and it's all about beauty, and that's what attracted me to it. And so
pose, I mean,
right, and it's being regarded as the sort of beautiful object, and I realize if I don't feel like that, and I never really fully do, of course, but there's degrees of it. If I don't, I feel very uncomfortable, and it brings up all of the sort of feelings of inadequacy that I try to avoid. So I think I compensate the inadequacy with beauty, and it's in everything. So much so that it wasn't, you're sort of living your experience, and it's not till you read the Enneagram or somebody points it out that you realize, oh, that's what it is. Like, it was just part of my way of being, right? And so yeah, I very, very strongly relate to the need for beauty, and can even be offended, when something isn't beautiful. And I think that's where the snobby part comes from. Yeah,
that's an important piece. We see it even more with the sexual instinct. That need for beauty is really critical. In fact, I haven't met a sexual that doesn't feel that way. The social and the self-pres will often have something symbolic of what matters to them. But it could be the way words are crafted and the vocabulary of a self-pres. For sexual can have it as well, but it can show up that way. The social for, let's ask Rod, because it is distinctive. Like, not all fours express themselves the same way. They just have the same defense strategy.
Yeah, certainly for me, when I think of beauty, I think of language and sound. So that's also music, but especially language. Since I was a kid, I've been very interested in other languages. I'm have the ability to learn languages fairly easily. I love to listen to the sounds of them. And I love the sounds of my own language. And I, as a writer, I have to be quite careful about not being overly enamored by my language. And then I am married to a one, so that always helps. She is not overly enamored with my language. And it's great. It's great to have an editor because it is truly, I've done writing. I still can remember sentences I love. That's how bad it is. So for me, I mean, beauty is very important. But I guess, yes, it's not so much physical and what an exterior. I mean, I do like, I think a word that I would use for the exterior is kind of classic, that's a word that's just sticking with me right now. I like things to have a certain kind of class to them. But really, when I think of beauty, I do think of language and sound.
You know, class is a really important word for the social four. Classic has become something that is common in a way, but originally it was being able to show your class. And I love the way you explain that because it's really important to the social four to know that they have a distinction. And that's what gives them significance too. But it's invariably the vocabulary that fours from a very young age are incredibly articulate. Patty, what do you relate to of being unique or your personal stamp or the type of creativity that you need?
Well, I don't actually relate all that well to so much to the word unique as I do to the word, other words like beautiful, authenticity, tasteful, grace, refined. And I was writing down some of the words that the other fours were talking about that meant something to me. Poetic. Those are words that mean a lot to me. And beauty is an ordering principle for me because I'm visual primarily. But
that is an important factor, just like Rod likes music and being auditory.
Mm-hmm. Unique doesn't appeal to me all that much simply because I was taught early on to look for fours that look different. That was one of the...
But you didn't, if you weren't taught that and you didn't know anything about the Enneagram, would you have gravitated towards the word unique?
Yes.
Yeah, I know fours don't like it anymore because it's become common.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I don't like anything that's loud or I'm not the person that would run around with purple hair, that would want to have purple hair. And there are types that do want that and they look great on it, great with it. But for me, I wouldn't like it even if it looked pretty on me simply because it was just too, trying too hard to be different. And I just feel like I don't need to do that. In fact, if anything in my life, I've tried to fit in a little bit more to make my life easier for me, to soothe some of the maybe anxiety or the separation that I feel, that I experienced, early on as a child with my parents because I didn't fit in. I'm an only child and I just didn't fit in. So beauty is everything to me, and being beautiful, I feel beautiful, and I want everything around me to be beautiful. My husband, my everything, my environments, my children, my friends. So it's something that I just have a constant impulse to create. And I could relate to Sterling saying about the hotel. I'm like, Don calls me the princess. I'm the princess in the pea. Because if something is off aesthetically, I just find it rather stressful, especially if I feel like I can't fix it. If I'm in a hotel and I can't make the drapes better, or I can't fix the molding, then it's kind of stressful because it's not simple as it could be.
That can be quite common among fours, especially the sexual four. Self-pres 4 is a little more enduring, but they will, and they're more self-contained, but the sexual 4 needs that kind of the world to be mirroring what they value. So generally everything, one way or another, has to be a reminder of that, where, as I mentioned, a self-pres 4 might just, when they don't have any money, they might just want to possess one thing that's really elegant and symbolic of their taste or their idea of exquisite. Actually, 4s like the word exquisite. And it could be just a crystal, piece of crystal that does that. And they would have no business spending money on a really, like an antique, usually, something that's a one of a kind. So thank you, Patty. That is meaningful. You know, the another key feature of 4 is this always seeing what's missing. Now, it's a biological imperative. Each Enneagram type has a job they need to do. And the 4 is the type that is meant to notice what's missing and then search for it. If they can't have it or can't find it, it becomes a preoccupation to do so. And this is where the longing comes in. Much of the sexual instinct and type 4 mimic one another. The reason for that is Naranjo created the instincts in terms of subtypes, the instinctual subtypes, after the first dissemination of the Enneagram by Ichazo. Ichazo originally called what we now call the 3 centers, he called them instinctual triads. So in Naranjo's attempt to explain an additional variation within types, he divided each type into 3 categories that he called the subtypes, because they were subversion of Ichazo's original instincts. So with the sexual instinct, it would be the more primitive version of the heart center. So the average version of a type is that they're in the heart center and they represent one of 3 types. Their higher states would be the holy idea and the holy virtues and unbound instincts. In other words, just doing what's called for in the moment, no more, no less. So what Naranjo was doing was amplifying what Ichazo taught. But instead of looking at the roles, like heart types need to find the role that will help them be seen. And the 4 that's sexual really needs a role of desirability. So that's why it's more specific with the sexual 4. But all 4s want to be desirable, but more specifically, all 4s really don't want to be undesirable. They have to have something that makes them feel significant. And as Miriam was saying, the 4 with 5 or with 8, it can be expertise, but there has to be something that you have and you know really well to be able to relax, because all 9 types want to be able to relax. So what is it that you do really according to your type and your tritype and your instinctual stacking that allows you to relax? Because it's like a compulsion, whatever our type is. That's why Naranjo doesn't have anything positive about any of the types in what he's written, because he thinks it's just egoic and we should go beyond our ego. But most of us realize we have to live day in and day out with an ego that reminds us to eat or relate to others. But this, what's missing, is always perceived by the 4 as critically important. Do you relate to that? You're aware of what's missing in any situation. It could be what someone's not saying. It could be wanting something and having to go without it.
Sure.
Sterling?
Yeah. I definitely relate to focusing on what's missing. I think what I want to kind of underscore about that is how it can be painful if people don't recognize the value of that. I'm thinking about, particularly in my family system, that it's just my natural inclination to go to what's missing, and not even in a negative way, just the information that's missing. Or, in my case, you were talking about needing to have sort of expertise or something that gives you kind of significance. And for me, it's knowing all the systems I know about people, and my family just generally is not that into it, but I always bring that piece. And it's always sort of kind of like, yeah. And it's not that, they don't see it as significant. So it's when I bring in the piece that's missing or that's significant, and people don't recognize it as such, it is sort of a number on your identity, right? Because your identity sort of is hinged on focusing on what's not there and feeling like you need to highlight it. And then if it's diminished, then it's sort of, it acts as kind of a diminishing agent against the self, until you learn that people aren't really doing that, but the ego still interprets it that way.
Oh yeah. And even when any type has done a lot of work, the defense strategy still comes up. We just know how to move through it and not attach to it so that the suffering is unnecessary. Whereas when we're unaware, we don't realize it's a defense strategy. And 4s can often think that they're fundamentally flawed, that there's something wrong with them, that other people are brilliant in math and they aren't. Why didn't they get the genes for math? Or like as Miriam said, like, what was wrong with their karma that they didn't get it? And, Miriam made the comment about the colored hair, whether it was purple or another color. And in my experience, it's actually the 6 that wants to have colored hair. 4s could, but like, I certainly know 4s that have, but overall, it's more the rainbow version of 6 that likes the colored hair, the counterculture 6, for what that's worth. It's very easy to mistype someone flamboyant as a 4. Really flamboyant people are 2s and 7s and some social 6s. So kind of clearing up some of these misunderstandings is helpful. So thank you, Sterling. That is really meaningful the way you described it, because the 4 cannot hold on to an image of themselves. It's in a constant state of change. And the container is what helps the 4 keep it fixed for a period of time. So if that container, whatever it is, your thing that you're really good at, is not mirrored, it's very distressing. It's not immaturity. It's like, you don't know which way is up. It's like having the bends and you're deep sea diving and you don't know if you're going further down or further up or the wrong direction. And that is what is called disorientation that the 4 suffers from. That they need to know who they are, to have a sense of self, to be able to hold on to themselves and not feel lost and directionless. So that's the symbolic part of lost. It really, lost is such an important word for 4.
Yeah, there's another piece of that when you were talking early on about this with the desirability part for me as a sexual 4, which I didn't really realize this was playing all the time, but there is a part of me that feels like I have to be desirable. And I guess, you know, some of that's image type, but also just if I'm not desirable to someone, then I turn it inward, and there's what am I missing that makes me not desirable to who I want to be desirable to. I'm relentless about figuring out what it is and then trying to compensate, because I guess maybe it's the Tritype. I don't want people to know that I feel inadequate or insecure about it, but I'm really like, you know.
The 4, 7, 8 in any version doesn't want to give anyone the power of knowing that. Because the 4 would feel shamed, the 8 would feel disempowered, the 7 would feel inferior. So it's really, really critical.
Yeah.
Thank you. Desirability is essential for all sexuals, regardless of the type.
Well, I can really relate to feeling like a lost soul, and until I discovered that I was an artist, because no one in my family liked that I couldn't do what everyone else in school could do or what my parents could do. And when I was a young adult and discovered I could draw, that I had a natural ability to do that, and that it was the only thing I was ever really good at, that came easily for me. So I can relate to I think I've heard you say this, that if 4s don't make art, they make bad art out of their lives. And that was a phrase that really meant something to me, and I think that's what you're asking for.
It's a very meaningful phrase. I actually heard it from Tom Condon, but yeah, it's stuck. 4s relate to that for sure.
Because once I found what I could do, what I was good at, and it doesn't matter what it is. Right now I'm a painter and I do color consulting, but I've been a classical sculptor. I can design houses, I can design cars, I can do anything, you know, doesn't matter what it is. I can design clothing, jewelry. So once I figured out who I was, that was my container, that's my vehicle, then things got a lot better for me. And when I'm with people who don't either value that, it's extremely painful. But I haven't really encountered much of that since I've left my original home with my family. They didn't value that. But I find in the world, even though I'm so used to feeling like I'm the one that isn't good enough, I've learned that most people think what I can do is amazing and magical.
Exactly. In fact, one of the strategies to work with that feeling of being flawed in some ways is to recognize that even if it seems like it, there are not a bunch of people that have everything. There's some deficit. It just isn't what the 4 is seeing. And what the 4 knows how to do, they can do it really well. And others don't have that skill. And then part 3 of that is that the 4 can take that ability, like designing, and design anything. My 4 grandfather was an artist by profession. And he could draw really fine hosiery, but he preferred thick paints, and it was very different. But having said that, he designed for magazines, and then he designed Cadillacs, and then he designed his homes, and he design parts of aircraft. If you have that ability, you just need to learn the parameters, or have someone you work with that applies that designing ability. Yeah, and 4 and 7 are the most common designers with that skill. 4, 7, 8 as well, because the creative type in each center. But yeah, thank you. That cross ability. I want to say something though before I move on to the next person, is that 4s can also have the problem of being the golden child. So when they're young, they can be so aware of subtlety and talk about it as like little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, that they can be in a way pampered or cherished young, and they can do things that other children can't do, that adults appreciate or get a kick out of. But there comes a point in elementary school where children catch up, and then the 4 doesn't know why they're not as significant as when they were very young. And it'll just be that simple difference that they could do it so young, but they're still able to see other things and do other things that are distinctive. It's just the 4 gets thrown off. And the sexual 4 in particular, who was the golden child, and the only child, can make it even more so. But if you don't match your parents, that's hard. But most of us don't match our parents that much because we're individuals. And the 4 needs to be an individual. But they will look and look and look and try to figure out what that flaw is that they don't know how to recognize. And this is most commonly seen in the sexual 4. Whereas the self-pres 4 will just give up and determine they just don't know what it is, and they just need to get through it. So this is very much based on instinct. So Rod, I don't think you shared what's missing.
Well, certainly my instinct plays a lot into that. For me, what's missing is understanding the subtext around me. And I have been my life obsessed with trying to understand why everything seems to be going great, and yet I can feel like something's not quite right. It is if I can smell shadows, right? And for me, the Enneagram has truly brought a great deal of comfort for me. You were talking about how for the obsession, when you feel like you've kind of got something about it, it really is very comforting, very, very much so. I am very aware of the people around me, kind of how they sound, the words they're using, just the inflections. It just kind of enters me, and I can very much can feel when someone feels congruent to me, when someone feels incongruent to me, and when they feel incongruent to me. That's why I'm trying to understand, what is that? I do much better interacting one-on-one. When I have to interact with a group, that's actually stressful for me, because I have to be kind of, it's like all these various subtexts are all kind of interacting with each other. My 6 really comes out at that point. And I feel when I'm able to, sense what is the missing is, I'm missing something about the whole person. There's something that isn't feeling congruent. That has been a part of my life since I was a young child. It has led me to become a psychiatrist. So that really is the search for the missing, the noticing for the missing. What's not fitting? How is this character not fitting in the story they're telling?
Absolutely. And you've also touched on the 4's need for meaning. And more specifically, it's a human need, obviously, to search for meaning. But with the 4, the reason is critical. Like Ichazo called the 4 the over-reasoner, just always needing a reason for what's happened, what's going on, for why they didn't have something that they wanted and someone else did. And for the 4, if they can't find a reason, they can't give meaning to their suffering around whatever the issue is. Now, if you grew up in a childhood that was sad and you couldn't exist as an individual, or a number of different things could cause you to feel sad, it's very easy to think you're a 4. But with the 4, it's more than sadness. It's almost a push-pull with sadness. I don't know if this is true with you, Sterling, with the garden, but 4s will often share that they are profoundly touched by beauty. But if they're really upset, if they look at something beautiful, they can kind of manage that suffering on one hand, as you mentioned, but there's also a part of 4 that doesn't feel enough. So they stir up feelings to kind of feel themselves. See, it's a misnomer to believe that heart types feel more, and then head types think more, and gut types do more or go into action more. It's not quite true. It's the opposite. Heart types are trying to get people to respond to them and feel. If they're not feeling, heart types don't consider it real. You need to be able to have a feeling around something. And 4s in particular would rather be angry or frustrated. Chronic frustration is a term that Ichazo gave to the 4. Because if you're frustrated, there's always a possibility you can get it again in the future. If you've gone to resignation, it's a type of deadness that 4s don't want to experience. So the energy will always go to finding a reason. And what's so interesting about defense strategies is that when we give our little brains a reason for something, it could be totally wrong, but we relax. And then if we discover a new piece of information and have to reshuffle our understanding of ourselves, then we relax again. So do you relate to that, Sterling? Back to you just on that one in terms of needing to amp up feeling to feel?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw that a lot in my 20s and maybe early 30s a little bit. There was that sort of need to, yeah, if I wasn't feeling something intensely, then it was, I would listen to, of course I had many playlists of sad songs that I could turn to create the emotional intensity that would help me to feel. And if when I started doing more spiritual work and, sort of naturally getting to a place of more balance, it was disturbing to me because it was like, where's the stormy part, right? Like and there would, I would try and drum it up and it became, I can still do it, but it's not as easy as it used to be. But, and the other piece I wanted to talk about was, you were mentioning this sort of, if you're not frustrated, then there's always that piece of you that feels like you may get what you want. And I've always had this sort of strange relationship, I guess, with the universe where I didn't realize it till I was a little older that the suffering, I feel like if I don't suffer, then I won't get anything. And so it's this attraction and need. It's not even an attraction. It's literally like an imperative. Like I must suffer about this or I won't get anything. I won't be seen. I'll be overlooked. And then I kind of feel like the universe owes me something a little bit. And so the suffering kind of helps to bring meaning to that.
Then that's where the entitlement comes. Each Enneagram type becomes entitled for a different reason, but the 4 becomes entitled because they've suffered. Now, a back piece on this relationship to suffering is that the 4 also believes that they can't show that they're weak or undesirable in any way. But if you have grief and are suffering, it doesn't mean you're weak in the minds of the defense strategy of 4. So it's an acceptable way to get attention. So if you're grieving and talking about grieving, and I see it a lot with 6s as well, the sad 6 and the sad 2. But for 4, it's like the lens through which the 4 is seeing everything, the degree of suffering. And if you can't give meaning to suffering, it will plague you and undermine you and be a preoccupation that feels really, really destabilizing to the sense of self. So I want to move into, well, in the missing part, I just want to add that the 4 remains searching the rest of their lives. They're always searching for a more exquisite experience that wins over the last one. So the way the 3 has to have a new goal, they're only as good as their last goal. The 4's only as good as their last creation, their last moment of feeling they handled something in a really extraordinary way, or they had a profound feeling or insight. So it's very similar. And the 2 feels that way as a fellow heart type when they've helped someone, when they've made a difference in someone's life. Whereas the 4 can make a difference in other people's lives by bearing witness to the suffering of others. And one thing that's extraordinary about 4s is they have endurance for other people's suffering until the person that's suffering cannot find meaning in their suffering. Then it's frustrating to the 4, and the 4s are back in that fussy state of chronic frustration. They will put more time in than any other type in bearing witness and giving feedback with the bearing witness. But it's really critical to the 4 that the person begin to do the process as well of giving meaning to their suffering. I think this kind of weaves right into personal quests. Now, again, any type can go on personal quests, but 4s are doing it for as long as they can remember. They're doing something that is a journey that is different from what most people are doing. You know, I always laugh when I say the word different and 4 together, because when I created that Any-Style questionnaire many years ago, I gave an example with the word different. And so this is how you might answer it. And then a 4 never used the word different again. So I had to take that off to have them say different. But actually, it's the 4 who wants to be different. It's the 6 who's afraid of being too different. unless their career encourages a certain type of different, or their hobby. And the 5 just is different. So it's what goes with the word that's different for the 4 that's important, because it's a motivator for 4. Now, the unconscious need for the 4 is to find the way that they can be the center of attention without looking bad, without having a flaw pointed out. Ironically, the 4 that's really stressed out can look bad in their attempts to show suffering to get the attention they desperately need. 2s, 3s, and 4s all want to be the center of attention because they have a fear of being ignored. And if you're ignored and you're not responded to, it feels devastating to a 4. And as David Fauvre said, you know, love your 4, hate your 4, but don't ignore your 4. That is the most painful thing, is to not get the response. Now, 2 and 3 feel that as well, but the 4 is even willing to display unpopular behaviors if they feel they're true. It's like the 4 is the type most inclined to say the emperor has no clothes. And this need for beauty, depth, and authenticity is how they find themselves, as I mentioned, but it is an unconscious need until they learn about the Enneagram. If they happen to go into the creative arts, they feel extraordinary. But if they try to do something mainstream, they will always find the way that they don't measure up. And with the coping strategy, melancholy is an essential ingredient. So melancholy is what the 4 is going for when they're seeking a response from others. Like if you show melancholy, it's not too much for people usually, and they will ask you how you are. Hey, how are you doing? So it's a way for the 4 to have attention without overtly asking for it. And as we all know, if we ask for something, it doesn't mean we're going to get it. And the 4 feels shame asking for something and not getting it. So melancholy and nostalgia are a way to feel feelings that are not readily available and or get attention from others. Now, the other piece I want to say about that is that the 4 can also feel that if they don't have something specific that they do really well, then they're lost in the crowd. Whatever crowd that is, life in general, there needs to be something that the 4 can identify with that is uncommon, interesting and uncommon. So I would love to see how the 4s feel about melancholy and what's uncommon, and how conscious were you in terms of awareness that you needed attention and you did something, you displayed something unique about yourself or that was valued in your family system to get attention. Rod?
Oh, well, I was fortunate. I did have a lot of attention in my family system, and had kind of a lot of attention in my world, even in my social world, as I was growing up, thinking in high school. So just trying to think, the melancholy. For me, again, I'm going back to what I said before, is it was kind of odd for me to be getting all the attention and somehow just kind of knowing, yeah, there wasn't really authentic. I mean, there was something missing. There was something that, so it was, that's what probably, there was making maybe kind of melancholic, was everything's kind of going okay, and yet it really did feel like things were not okay around me. And that always led to a certain amount of fear, the sixth part of me. Irritability, like I just, let's get going with this, people, the eighth part of me. And, but just a constant sense of, well, for me, the longing is probably just hearing this voice. Can't we finally get this? What is going on? That would be my immediate responses to that.
Well, you know, there's always a cost. So usually, even if you're the golden child and you're given attention, you may not be getting accurate mirroring. And that's the cost. So you're going to get attention, but the ideal for the four is for someone to see them for who they are, not just the thing they can do, the way in which they're accomplished. Like they like the word accomplish better than achieving. Achieving was still striving, still trying to be something to the four, whereas an accomplishment was something they had done that was finished and complete and valued. But talking about the cost is important as well. Did you feel that cost, Rod, that you...
Oh, absolutely. And I think, thinking about how, again, I have a kind of persona that I can put on, and that is that certainly when I was younger felt very much the false self, true self. Okay, and that was feeling that as a defined, something's really wrong here. As I've gotten older, actually, kind of my persona is the introjection of my father. My father was a 369, and so he was an everyman, and he could get along with everybody. And I have an ability to kind of morph into that psychic state, kind of a physiologic state. And as I've gotten older, I think, oh God, that makes life so much easier. I mean, it really is just like, oh wow, you just can get along with people easier in that state. But of course, is that underneath it though is still a true desire for uniqueness, authenticity, and to be seen for that. So that goes back to, as you were saying, I learned well. I play a good 369 on TV, and I've learned really well to do that. But it always did feel like, but if you really knew what I was thinking about you right now, things wouldn't be so happy right now.
Yeah, and I would say that the often the introverted four, but more specifically the social four, disguises their contempt a little easier. They know that they're not measuring up to groups as much as they want. They want to be that person called upon for their expertise, but the four always knows that they need to know more and could know more. And so this can sound one-ish too, and should know more. But the reason for the fours, they don't want to be caught off guard as being incorrect. So whereas the one has a fear of being wrong, bad, evil, or corruptible, and therefore they need to be right, The 4 has a fear of being inadequate and defective, flawed, and meaningless to people. Just so what happens with the 4 is they try, even if they have a defect, I should even say that, they will make a persona out of it. They'll weave it in and create a meaning for whatever they're struggling with. And I can't tell you how many times there might be 4s that actually had a visible disability. And they would share with me that they use that disability, or let's say it was a wheelchair or an arm brace to walk, for example. They used it as a prop to begin the communication, because starting communications can be very difficult for the self-conscious 4. Very easy for the 2. The extroverted 2 has no problem. They're always bridging into some sort of communication. But the self-conscious 4 really appreciates and wants other people to move towards them, because then they feel safe. But here's the catch. That person has to be someone that would get who they are. So that's what I was leading to with Rodney, is that there is a cost, and the desire is for that perfect mirroring. And after a certain age, they're young too, but it's very frustrating to not have that mirroring. Sterling, do you have anything to say on that? And then we'll go to Patty.
Yeah, I kind of keyed in on the piece about the wanting attention, but I have always had a lot of shame around wanting attention. And then when I go to the shameful place, it's sort of like, I'll make you notice me.
Yeah.
And there's sort of an anger in it. I think that's where you can get the kind of vitriolic.
And that's 4 and 8 coming together too. I'll make you notice.
Yeah. So I definitely have that, but there is shame around even wanting attention. Like I maybe the 8 says, don't want it, but the 4 is like, no, I want attention. So I do have that kind of warring part in me. And then also the way that I sort of, I guess I kind of unconsciously built my persona, I guess. I even hate the word, but I know that it exists. I kind of unconsciously built the persona to be, I made myself kind of intimidating to people. Like I got an advanced degree, and then I, became, started doing ballet at an advanced age when people didn't do that, and got good at that. And people always find me intimidating and all these accomplishments. And like, to me, when people compliment them or say things about them, it doesn't land anywhere, because it's like, they're not really seeing, it's like I've dazzled them, and it's like, oh, you're an idiot because you're not seeing past all of that stuff.
Yeah, the dazzling facade.
Yeah. And because what I really want people is to see the, all the deep dark stuff that I don't show. But if you can't get past the facade, then I don't usually have time for people, because there's no depth in it. But then if they don't see it, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because if they don't see it, then it's like, why didn't you notice that or say something about that? So there's kind of a
especially with the 7 in the Tritype, there is an additional desire to be dazzling. The 7 brings that need for sparkle and shine, and the 8 brings the need to be intriguing. So the 4 wants to be mysterious, but if you have that Tritype and you're the sexual instinct, you need all of it. So you want people to notice, to begin at appreciating what you've done with the little Christmas lights, but then thereafter, you want the person to see deeper parts of you that you're not going to reveal. And that's also really common with the sexual 4, because it's all about, as you go deeper, the energy rises. And the energy is what is intoxicating.
Yes. Yes. The deeper it gets, the more the more the intensity rises. The deeper it is, the more the intensity rises. And if I can't get that, I know how quickly I can get it with someone. And if I know it's not in there, I'm on to something else, because I need to know that it can at least reach that kind of fever pitch, or I'm just not interested. So it's, yeah, definitely.
Thank you. You know, in terms of the strength, the 4 is immediately recognized for having an unusual approach, but not unusual like a 7. 7 just like something changing and different. The 4 is cultivating an image around what's different for them. So it's not going to change as quickly. However, having said that, if the 4 finds their idea of a winning kind of image that gives them a mysterious quality that people want to get to know, that's good. But then anxiety comes up for the 4, kind of an emotional anxiety. Oh, maybe I need to also add this. So it's like having a website where it's functional, it's working, you put it all together, but then you hear something that, oh, you need this on your homepage to capture the little bots that tell others where your website is. So that what happens is the 4 is always in a state of change, even though they want a more concrete sense of self. And in that state of change, they haven't refined it yet. So they're always refining, and then a new piece needs to come in, and then refining that. And the in-between times is when the 4 feels the most frustrated, or like you said, if you're not getting the attention, it's like, what's missing? What are you not doing? And it's not just, the need for attention is human. It's just that the 4 has refined the way in which they go about being worthy of attention, their version of exquisiteness. So, Patty, what would you say about that? Now, as a 4-7-9, it's the most lyrical tritype of all. So there's a kind of a melody to the very way that the 4-7-9 moves and things. It's the most receptive tritype as well.
It's a difficult question for me to really answer, because what do I do to get people to pay attention to me? It's so different as a child.
We'll go with the child, because you're just more sophisticated now.
Because I was invisible, and yet my parents were constantly on me to be different than what I was. And so I loved it when they weren't paying attention to me. So anything I could do around my home life to get them to not notice me was golden. But in school, in other arenas, I was always doing really crazy, flamboyant things and outrageous things and I realize now that was to get attention, because I couldn't have the kind of attention I wanted at home. And I was hoping to find my place, I guess, somehow at school by being the outrageous person in the class. And because I couldn't do the math.
Can be different from flamboyant. So how are you defining flamboyant?
Well, you know, my mother, I also had this other thing I'll mention that will maybe help, is because I had metaphysical influence in my life, and which is now mainstream. But growing up, I was counseled by my mother and her friends to never talk to anybody about my metaphysical beliefs and what we thought, which is basically mind over matter type of stuff. And so I learned at a very early age that it wasn't safe to do that. And so that's another way to hide who I really am, and which is it's a huge part of my life, even as an adult. So what were you going to?
How are you defining flamboyant? The reason I ask is that many people described what they thought was the 4 as flamboyant, but the 4 did not see themselves as flamboyant. They saw themselves as having a sense of aesthetics, and that flamboyance was cheap by comparison. So that's why I'm interested in your definition.
It would be, I think outrageous is a better word.
Yeah, I think so.
Not flamboyant.
Because 4s
and reckless, very reckless.
Yeah, sexual 4 is very reckless.
Very reckless and very kind of dangerous even.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything to give me a sense of freedom, really. And I would do anything. And to some extent, I'm that way still. I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, we may know how to manage these qualities, especially when we learn about the Enneagram and we can observe it in a more specific way. But the 4s, like for example, someone like Liberace was thought of as a 4, but he was a 2, very flamboyant person, colorful, upbeat. And the 4 is like a downbeat. It's depth, the black keys on a piano versus the white keys. The 2 is meant to have the up personality, 2 and 7. And then the 4 and 5 are the types that feel really close to the abyss. So they're aware of their vulnerabilities. And for those of you that haven't seen the 8 panel, I mentioned that 8s don't think of themselves as having a fear of vulnerability. It's a good descriptor for looking at the 8, but the 8 thinks that they're avoiding being weak and pathetic, which is different to the 8. But that relationship to the word flamboyant, it offended a lot of 4s actually. But the people that were being referenced weren't 4s anyhow. Because even if the 4 is outrageous, they have their personal style. And it doesn't usually match their peer group because there's a lot of interest in individuating from their peers, but still having peers. Did you relate to that?
Well, I think the reason I was outrageous is because being sensitive, I'm ultra sensitive, I'm a highly sensitive person, was not okay. It was dangerous to be that, very not safe. So being louder and outrageous and reckless was much safer. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Rod or Sterling? Rod, do you want to say more on that? And we'll go to Sterling. Really, let's look at flamboyant versus outrageous.
Well, yeah, flamboyant would not be, of course, again, I'm social, all right? So last thing I want to be is flamboyant, all right? I'm willing to be outrageous if it kind of sets me apart, right? Again, I think, but I think for me, since being so aware of the community, so aware of people around me, I go back to the word that I used before, which was classy and class. Okay, it is. For me, being outrageous would be kind of really just kind of. I mean, oh God, I can feel this so. It's just the truth of me. I could just feel this, like I could outclass you. Okay, I really, and you are out of your league when you're dealing with me. Okay, these kinds of feelings I have to let go. Like, oh my God, you just said that, but that is that, and so yeah, flamboyant. People laugh at what's flamboyant. I feel that, or like
they actually do.
Yeah, like but I mean, but if you're outrageous, it is certainly if you are. I can't find my word right now, but it's you just make it, this is my 4 and 8 and 6, just all this reactivity coming out, like yeah, I'll create an outrage. I mean, I'm more than glad to do that. And now then, of course, I'm frightened that I've actually could do too much. So it is for me as the social, it's always managing that, just being just enough outclassing, outraging, but not too much, because if you do too much, absolutely. Oh my God, absolutely.
Because it's important to know this is why the 4 is considered the elitist, and the sexual 4 is elitist in one way and the self-pres in another, but the social 4, it exactly feels that they, even if they didn't come from the same part of town, they have a quality of class that would outshine anyone. But underneath it is a fear that you'll be found out. The social 4 talks about this fear that they may have, like the sexual 4, dazzle others, but the social 4 feels like they can leave an impression, an aura that they might not be able to live up to if people see them in another setting. They can feel easily exposed because there's that need to be as twinkly in every arena. And if people start crossing arenas and they don't see you dazzling in all of them, the 4 feels like they're being diminished. So this fear is of exposure. Now, all heart types have a fear of being exposed for what isn't real, the ways in which they've taken their false self to be their true self. Do you remember feeling like that you had to be very mindful of not saying or doing too much that could expose you one way or another?
Oh, absolutely. And being, so therefore, really focusing, I think you talked about this before, you want to find your niche, okay?
Yes.
And then when you got your niche, baby, you got your niche, okay? And it is, but you get outside your niche, boom, right? And you is a whole different kettle of fish. And oftentimes that's what I will go into, kind of a bit of a kind of quiet, not say much, and just be smiley. That's a defense against a tremendous fear of not being so competent. Okay, so it's for me, niching is a big word.
Competence is what the 4 is going for. It's not enough to be competent. You have to be competent in a very eloquent way. In other words, it has to reflect the meaning. It's like the 4 is like the beauty of black and white photos, shadows and placement and composition. All those things are playing out in the psyche of the 4. Do you relate to that, Sterling?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking of the whole flamboyance piece, and I hate that word, but for me, it's probably as a queer person, the word has a pejorative kind of thing for me. So there's the double aspect, but I did relate to what Patty was saying about outrageous there, especially in school, even starting in elementary school and high school. I would just randomly do, it wasn't random because I'm sure it was wanting attention or needing to set myself apart in some way, but I would do outrageous things. And sometimes those outrageous things were, you know, standing up for something that I believed in, you know, or that sort of passion for protests that we talk about with 4.
Yeah,
and
thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would really put myself out there, and probably, you know, I related somewhat to what some of the 8s were saying in the 8 panel, because I did stuff like that when I felt like something was really wrong. And so, but I could do other things that were just outrageous, you know, and but then also kind of going with what Rod was saying, it's that there's always been that sense to me where no one could outclass me. You know, no one could be snottier than I could be. And I, you know, and it was a way of holding power also. It's that way of knowing that I can go to that place, and, you know, if I'm really honest, it was just a defense mechanism, obviously, but it was a way to prevent from being hurt. So if somebody was going to try and, you know, be rude to me or snotty to me, or, you know, make me feel less than, then, you know, I could find a way to, you know, put them down a notch.
Do it back, which all 3 types have that ability. And the same with the 4, 6, 8, because the 6 becomes counterphobic. And so like what Rodney was saying about, he was saying, yeah, you don't want to go there. Or are you, in 8 language, are you sure you want to go there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you want to, because I can give it back to you in spades. Well, the 4, 6, 8 can do that because the 6 becomes counterphobic, and the 4, 7, 8 can do that because it's just the very nature of the type. But having said that, the 4, 7, 8 can also have this other quality of being very stealth. And, you know, with the 8, I call it the stealth bomber, but it's really with any version of 4, 7, and 8, where it takes these intense energies of the creative types with in a container that can be seen but cloaked when the 4, 7, 8 wants that cloak on. So there are times when you would want a cloak of invisibility, and it's when you fear something might reflect negatively upon you, correct?
Yeah.
Like you were saying?
Yeah, it's when I feel like if I'm going to experience, you know, shame around it or something like that, then I can, you know, I can definitely cloak easily. So there's that range of either being able to be outrageous or do it in a cloaked kind of stealthy way where you might not even know kind of what hit you. I can do it that way too. So it just kind of depends on, what's at stake. I think that's
what's at stake is critical. Now initially the passion for protest was not taught by Naranjo. He found that was true over time because, like anyone in their career, he worked with more and more people, and those that were 4s had an outrageous story of some kind. His favorite story was a married 4 that was having an affair with a married 7. And when the female 4 found out that her lover was interested in someone else as well, she felt fury. And the way she managed the fury was to invite him to a hotel room, wait until he was undressed, and take his clothes and throw him out the window. Now, it was in a country where the hotel room had windows that could be opened, but it was a way that he described the sexual 4 in particular, but all 4s needing to protest something that hurt them or something they felt they were entitled to or had the right to. And he said that when he worked with the 4, he was curious as to why that would be okay, because she was having an affair. And it's very different, because for the 4, it's like, what's at stake? What have I earned the right to? And if I don't get it, I'm going to let you know it. And what's behind this is a need to be seen. So what we might think, oh, how could someone think like that? Well, if you have a defense strategy that's telling you, you have to be different, you have to be elite, you have to be constantly changing, you have to be better than everyone else and different in your better, it's terrible pressure. And what he also gave as an example was another 4 that was sitting at a cafe having dessert and a coffee. And the equivalent of Secret Service, this was another country, came in and said, we have to clear the area because the president's coming through. And a 4 refusing, saying, I pay my taxes, I do this, I shouldn't have to move for anybody. And if the 4 is kind of average, there's a version of that, like, I'm exempt from the rules. Now, when the 4 becomes aware that there are 4, they can see that in motion, because they feel suddenly, if they have to move and they're having, time that they enjoy, reading a book, having coffee, and a piece of cake. So that is very meaningful, the passion for protest. And for those of you who don't understand the passion for protest, it's the 4 not only being a princess in the pea, there's also the person that's calling off what others aren't, that needs to be spoken. And the 3 types that do that are 4, 6, and 8. And with the 4, it will be whatever they feel people have a right to. So in my research, the 4s said that they felt that people had the right to their individuality, to be different and not standardized, and not, in a cookie cutter society that they might find in their home or at school or at work. And that their passion for protest shows up when they believe it's unfair. It's an issue of fairness. And 4, 6, and 8 will speak out about that. 1s will as well. They want to be fair and just, but the reactive types will speak it out in a more rapid way. Now, as a 4, 6, 8, Rod, I want to go to you and ask you about passion for protest. Then I'll go to Patty.
Yeah, it's so for me it is. I want to attach myself to something that's valued in the culture, and then I'm going to really value it. Okay, and it is. So that passion for protest is, if I feel something is unfair, not only do I want to bring it out, okay, I want you to feel it. Okay.
Yep.
And I want you to remember that I'm the one that made you feel it. Okay. Okay. It is, and it's a, and as a result, as I've gotten older, that's kind of a hard way to live. Okay. And you because I've actually succeeded in making people who still remember, and actually there's a part of me that doesn't mind that. Good. Don't ever bring it up again. Okay. But that's a hard way to live. And that's not, and so, what I find therefore is, as I'm getting older, that just takes a lot of energy. I mean, it just really takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
But yet it's still a part of me. But that's still a part of me. Okay. And so as I'm getting older, it's how to be able to express that passion. Okay. But in a way where just like, oh, you just don't have to deal with all the outsides, and the sequelae, and the consequences of it. Even though I have to admit,
Great way to say it.
I kind of like enjoying the consequences. I mean, I paid some prices, and I must say, even today, I think, oh, that was worth it, but so it's a real, again, we talked about the double-edged sword, but that passion where you can, and really, yes, 4, 6, it just wants to pow in.
And you're meant to, actually.
Yeah, and you feel more alive. I mean, I'm feeling probably, I'm showing it right now. And then I can go back into my, okay, everything's fine.
So you're the emotional Paul Revere,
mm-hmm.
where there's a sense of urgency too. It's immediate, the responding. Now, other types can be spontaneous or overly reactive, but with the 4, it's in some way evening the score. But what's different between 4 and 8 is for the 8, if it's square, it's square. Now, if you do it again, of course, then the measure has to be a little higher to stop that perceived inequity. But with the 4, because 4s have a quality of synthesia, meaning, and actually you demonstrated it earlier, Rod, that when you think about a distressing event, you feel it again. And a lot of 4s will report they have the smell, the sensations, the frustration, the sense of loss, or they go blank in trying to describe it. And the reason for that is this synthesia, that if you do go into the event, you're going to start responding like it's happening now in real time. So when we talk about the 4 being vindictive, it's really important to understand that we all want to put in our 2 cents. But if you are a 4 and that issue is raised again, it's so amplified within the 4 that there's a need to get even again. And that's why it's called vindictive. And originally, people didn't understand this. They thought that there was pleasure in that. And what they didn't realize is the 4 was genuinely feeling it again as a fresh wound. So the vindictive part was, that's a natural response if it feels in real time again and again. In fact, it feels even worse because you felt it so many times that then the tolerance for it goes down. And I find that if we look at the 4's need to protect themselves, even though there may be moments of glee when they get you back in the way they feel that you have hurt them, the cost was really high before that happened. That it's a way to just stop the angry envy, and the envy turned outward, but we can't ignore the envy turned inward. Patty, do you relate to that? Or how do you relate to that, I should say?
Well, that's also a very complicated question, I think. Definitely the power of protest is within me. And I think of so many examples, I wasn't sure, I can't think of which one to start with. And it depends on what the subject is. If it's something, fairness, of course, is very important to me. If it's related to my husband, who is the most important thing to me, then I can be physical if I'm upset and I think something unfair is happening. So my protest will look very physical and visceral.
So you'll be gesturing and louder, or?
Yeah, and when I was younger, I would throw things, before we were, really sophisticated couple psychologically, when you're working things out as a young couple, I remember I was very physical and, even until middle age, I would say if I felt something unfair was being done or that wasn't right, I would get pretty torqued up. So in the political arena, that's an area, and I've been in politics all my life. I've been very active in politics. If I feel something is unfair and I hear it on the news, which I can't watch anymore because I just I don't sleep at night if I watch the news. So I read a little bit of the news every day, but even that is hard on my system because I feel that there's just so much unfairness going on that we're in this kind of interesting situation, where I can't go doorbelling, and I do phone banking for my party, but I can't do anything other than that. And so watching the news is just way too much. That takes me over the top. I get short-circuited.
But going doorbelling is a way for you to protest something that you feel is wrong. Because
yes.
Your third type is social, and politics are considered social, but it's how politics are applied. Like a lot of self-pres people will be interested in politics because the outcome could affect them financially. Socials that are identified with social and leading with social could really be aware of what's going on or not. So it's a subjective thing. We have to define it. So the fact that you can't watch the news speaks again to the synthesia, or that intuitive kind of empathetic response that's unconscious. Because see, if it was conscious, you could just tell yourself not to be upset. But when it's unconscious, then there's an upset that you can't turn off, a shade you can't pull. Another way to look at it is I've been studying empathy since I had to do a term paper and a presentation on it when I was 16 years old, and I just never stopped. And now what's happened is empathy and sympathy have been combined, as that's what people need to be, and that is more ideal for all of us. But actually, empathy is very unconscious. We can feel what someone else feels, but it doesn't mean we want to. It doesn't mean that if we feel it, we're going to be nice to someone. It's another biological imperative. There are plenty of people that we would consider sociopaths that know what someone's feeling. They just don't care. They might be curious about it, and they could use it against the person to run a con or something if we look at the really lower functioning person. So we all have empathy. It just isn't necessarily the empathy that we're going to learn between age, ideally, 9 to 11, where we learn our impact on others and we modify it. There are plenty of people that choose not to modify it. But do you not watch TV because you can't stop that emotional pain that you feel?
Well, it's not, sure. I mean, it's very real for me. No, I can't. I can't. But I was going to say, I think it goes back to more than the social instinct. I think it has more to do with my sense of having something beautiful marred, like our country or the Constitution of our country. So, from my perspective, that's that's a thing of beauty, and it's a jewel. And so again, it might go back to aesthetics more than morality for me. But I think morality's in there too. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
No, you are. You
okay.
can't really answer it incorrectly because I'm going to use it as a tool to explain something more about the 4. And there's the word complex. The most emotionally complex type is actually the 6. But the type most identified with complexity being a positive thing is the 4. And the 5 is conceptually complex. They like to look at a piece in relationship to other pieces and what's created. And the 4 does that with the emotions. So it isn't a single emotion. It's that emotion in this situation with this meaning. Whereas the 6 will go from emotion to emotion as they're thinking. And that's why they think they're 4s. But for the 4, an identity comes from their emotions. And if the 4 has had to deal with a lot of unhappiness, they can develop a mindset that is, if I don't get what I need, doing things in a polite way, then I'm going to use negative emotions to make you notice, like you were talking about earlier. So, Sterling, how do you relate to that? I mean, the low side of 4 is to be depressive, overly self-involved. And, I do teach 4s and other types that when they're really self-conscious, it's a type of, to give a kind of an analogy, a type of narcissism where you're just overly aware of yourself and then feeling uncomfortable. And it's in varying degrees and levels of health and unhealth. But do you relate to the sensitivity of the 4, Sterling, and the self-consciousness and needing to, in a way, almost revel in negative emotion to feel or to get someone to notice that you are trying to say something? However it's true for you.
Yeah, I think maybe because the 7's in there, I don't want people to see me as negative. That would bother me. But I do feel it's a sort of compulsion for people to face whatever is what I consider real, right? So, and if that whatever is real in that moment is negative, then so be it, right? So that's kind of the way that I approach that.
Great example.
But I don't.
And might you take people kicking and screaming into the intense negative emotion that's not being spoken, like the elephant in the living room?
Yes. And so that's always been kind of the role I've played. I always kind of fancy myself a little bit like I work well with the shadow of everybody and psychologically, and I sort of bring that out in people. I seem to play that archetypally. And I think it's important for people to recognize their shadow, because it's very dangerous if it just grows behind you and you don't you don't notice it. So in that way, I guess someone could, someone who's very positively oriented could view me as negative. But I don't see it as negative. So and I suppose I probably have been labeled that, people in my family or other people as, because I'm calling out what's not being acknowledged. And sometimes what's not being acknowledged isn't pretty. And I'm fine with that. And so I guess the arrogance of the type could be that I need other people to be fine with it as well. So then I'll push to get people to acknowledge what's not there, or what they're not seeing, or what they're not acknowledging. Yeah.
Right.
And I can
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and yes, I can feel going back to what I said earlier, I can feel upset, I guess, after the fact. In the heat of the moment, I'm not upset. I usually come off fiery and intense when I'm really in the space of that. But later I can reflect on it and feel maybe shameful that other people thought I was too much in that respect.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is kind of leads into the true sorrow for that, not the sorrow that's amplified. Like, I remember working with a 4 years ago where she was remembering her father and what her father and mother were divorced. Her father was still alive, but she would either focus on the memory, which could be slim, where they had a good experience, or the negative experience. And I think what's important to understand about 4 is that both are true. That within the 4 is the negative and idealized, or the denigrated and idealized version of someone, and both are true. So you can hate someone and love someone, and it's just based on the truth of the moment. And so it's not just depending on the situation, like the 6, it's what emotion's been triggered. And the modification isn't for people around you. Like when the 6 says it depends, because they're adjusting, because one behavioral response could cause them more trouble than another. So they're trying to judge what will keep them safe. But for the 4, I would love it if you could explain how this is the way in which you feel a deeper sorrow and can hold both the denigrated version. So you can be really angry and frustrated one moment, and then remember a really great quality about that person as well.
Yeah. I'm as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about in my sort of important relationships, my intimate bonds. And I used to always have a tendency, and still do, I'll put it all out there in a conflict or to resolve something, including the parts that you don't say about yourself, like, the negative piece. And I kind of expect other people to do the same thing. It's kind of the way I do intimacy. And when they don't, that's what really hurts me, because I've put both aspects. I'll be like, yeah, I'm being arrogant and I'm being this and I'm being that, but I'm also this. And I forget that not everybody processes that way. And so when I can hold both the idealized and the denigrated part of myself and of other people. And I'll put those both out there. And then that's when people don't, for me as a sexual, when people don't do that back, that's really painful, because then it's like everything on the line. And then
they're seeing you as either positive or negative.
Right.
Rather than, and in fact, my guess is even when you tell them that you're arrogant and go on to other things, they're not really hearing that you are taking responsibility and know that you can be arrogant. Mm-hmm. Instead, can sound to people like a justification.
Mhm.
So it can be very, very painful to the 4, because the 4 is not trying to justify.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it does communicate that way. And it wasn't, until I learned the Enneagram that I figured that out. But I can still, that's just, my style is to just put it all out there. And I think that can be emotionally intimidating to people because
Very.
I yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I
You
can't.
did, because I was trying to weave into why the 4 is so good at bearing witness to people. It's because the 4 expects others to have pain and sorrow because they do. And they might even expect it to be normal for someone to be attached to an overly idealized version of a parent they never see, or overly negative view of a parent they never see, even if it's the same person. You can hold both. And I think that's one of the high sides of 4s, this ability to hold both. But the other types can't do that. So most of us, unless you have 4 in the Tritype, tend to think, oh, negative, that's the way you're going to feel about me, without realizing the 4 is going to feel your positive traits and your negative traits according to the way 4s are organized. Rod, would you say anything about that?
I just probably what I would add is I was thinking about this, planning for this for today. I feel most real, okay, when, and it is a biologic state, it's kind of how I'm understanding it now, that is in my chest. I mean, it is the heart center. And when there is this intense growing, and to me, it's kind of like a flower that you watch in a time, lag, time, sped up time, watch it just kind of, whoa, grow up. And it can be in living technicolor, for those of us who are old enough to remember that phrase, just absolutely beautiful color, okay? Or it could be a beautiful black, okay? But those are intense experiences, and those really are landmarks for me of experience. And I can, yes, experience both about any particular person, but in a way, why I think as a 4, I guess one of the reasons perhaps I can seem so self-involved is that experience is very intense. And when it is your marker, okay, of I remember not as much details about events as the emotions around the events, okay? I can actually classify events around the emotion that I had around them. And when you have that much emotion, it actually affects your ability at the time to really be able to think well. You're not able to, and you have to kind of get yourself out of it a little bit to be able to think about it. And so it is, in a way, when I experience that much emotion intensely, and when that's actually kind of a self-defining quality of me, whether it's positive or negative for you, it is, I mean, you almost can't really interact that well when you're in the midst of that. So you are kind of self-absorbed because you're trying to get out of this experience or enjoy it or avoid it or figure it out. So it's a very deep, intense that, yes, is both a beautiful color flower and then a beautiful black rose. And I feel the beauty of both and how frightening they can be.
Thank you. And it's the rose is beautiful, but it also has thorns. And that's the way a lot of 4s describe life for them, the search for the rose, but knowing that they're going to have to deal with constantly being pricked by whatever they're seeking, whatever is their quest, and never feeling like they've gotten there. And when they arrive at where they believe they will feel that equanimity, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about equanimity for four. Four is looking for that moment when everything is in its place and there's beauty and there's joy and there's sorrow and there's meaning. There are experiences that are kind of deep and divine to the four. But it's very hard to create those moments all day long. In fact, it's the ebb and flow that is what's so significant about life, is that we love it perhaps once a month when the tide comes in and we see, giant waves. I grew up at the beach, so it's a good analogy for me. But if it didn't also retreat and go out where we could see what's that was once underwater that's now sand, where you can collect shells, it doesn't have the same sense of rhythm to it. And I would say that fours are very much aware of the emotional rhythms of life and circumstances. And I would understand and do understand when the four is described as the drama king or queen. But in my experience, actually any type could be a drama king or queen. But with the four, the drama is wanting to feel more. And you need attention. It's believed unconsciously that you need attention to have feelings, because they aren't real to the four until they learn they're four, until someone bears witness to them. And if people aren't able to do that, this is when the four is going to kick in and amp up the sounds, so to speak. But any emotional type can be a drama king or queen. But overall, if we were to say which type is most that way, it would be the four. But it's also a source of mistyping. The types I did first, the two, the four, and I'm going to do I've done the 8, and I'm going to do the 6 next. I'm kind of doing it in the order that people mistype. I could have started with the 6 because they mistype the most. They don't find that they're 6 sometimes for 10 years, 20 years. But with the 4, they generally know their type unless they think they're a 1. And that is a very common combination. Or if the 4 feels they've had to clamp down on their emotional expression. Because the other thing is they want to express their authentic feelings. They don't want to have to sanitize emotions. They're looking for rawness and true expression as opposed to artificial expression. Now that culture to culture, that varies. Definitely, there are certainly some Asian culture, I can think of Korea, where it's just a part of everyday life to be upset all the time. And it's a 2 culture. It's the sad 2 culture. But they're very proud of their type of dignity and way in which they take care of people. But in the US culture, we're very much a 3 culture. So emotions are sanitized. They're limited in how you can express them. And it's, in a way, it's almost becoming more and more that way. I taught the Enneagram, calling it personality diversity in corporations, so they would value those differences rather than thinking one type was better than another. If you don't have all types, you're going to have like a tree that doesn't grow on one side or doesn't bear fruit, so to speak. Even if it's not a type you like if you're a 7, you might not like the depth that the 4 wants to go to all the time, but you will like 7 and 4 both like the unusual and aspects that are counter to ordinary. And the 7 can go deep, especially if there's a sexual 7, and talk about things and converse for a limited time. But the 4, that's just starting up. The desire is to continue on with that or to have those peak moments. So what I'd like to know is if there's anything that you would like people to know about 4 that I haven't mentioned that's really important to you or that you'd like to share. I'll ask each of you. I'll start with you, Rod, since we just had you first.
This is just probably this. I'm about ready to say this is probably the same for every Enneatype, but that really 4s are a really varied group. I think just the 3 of us, okay, and there is. I will say as a 4, there that stereotype because there is a stereotype. Yes, of the 4 that is don't be fooled by it, okay, and so I mean many people are surprised that I'm a 4, okay, but I truly am, you know, and I've learned various ways because I'm social, to be able to mask it, move around it, etc. But I think it's just we are a complex group, you know, and we can feel, you know, a lot of unity with each other, and yet also just, you know, and it's feel. And the one thing that I would think I have felt for both, you know, Patty and Sterling is just we just feel. So it's nice to be around people who feel. Okay, you know, that's just sort of like, okay, here we are.
Are motivated by feeling.
Yeah, and it's great, but we are very, you know, we truly are in that feeling is just an amazing amount of color, amazing amount of poetry, amazing amount of whatever your term is.
Yeah, thank you, because that is the intuitive part of 4. I mean, anyone can be intuitive, but the 4 lives their life being aware of a lot of intuitions. Whether they follow them or not is another thing, but they're going to experience it and feel it. Whereas other types, like a 1, 3, 5, might have to really develop and become aware of their intuitive impulses, whereas the 4 doesn't. They know immediately that they're that way. Thank you. Sterling?
I guess I would kind of like to underscore that when envy arises for the 4, which, you know, any type can experience envy, but you know, at least for me, I think it's that there can be a painful sense of like, if say something happens for somebody and they're really excited about it, or they get something they wanted, and it reminds the 4 of something that they don't have. It may not even be the exact same thing. That being in that space is not that, it's a painful place to be because we want to be happy for the other person, but because the attention goes to what's missing, it's just automatic. So, you know, I think 4s get kind of a bad rap on that end because it's sort of like, well, why can't you just be happy for this or that? And it's not that we don't want to be. It's that we're instantly, you know, the biological system is sort of meant to sort of go to, well, what don't I have that I didn't get? And then there's a cosmic sense of unfairness about it, that the other person got whatever it is they wanted, and then the 4 is like, well, but what about these things that I want that I didn't get? And so I kind of want to, I think it's a part that's misunderstood about 4 is
I
that,
agree.
yeah, it's just not coming from, we're not trying to be hateful or be mean. It's like, it hits it's like a knife in the gut sometimes when that happens.
And it's a natural thing. I like you talking about how automatic it is. And you could be happy for the person at first, like as it's going towards the person, but it then bounces back like a mirror of what you don't have.
Right.
And so it's not like you're thinking, I don't want that person to have it, unless they've offended, when you're younger and someone offends you, you might like it if they got their just desserts. But overall, it's more that it rises up to be happy for the person, but it bounces back so fast to do your own, just the way the mind of a 4 works is to go, do I have what I need? Where's my version of that? And if you can find your version,
right,
it ends up even. But if you haven't been rewarded for something that you should have been, it'll come up in that moment when someone has good news. If it's a particular type of good news that you want and haven't received, it's extraordinarily painful. Why? Because you're feeling it again, like the moment when you didn't get what you needed. So that's why I really appreciate that, Sterling, and I encourage people to understand that about 4s, and that the 4 will come around because they're innately aligned with people. It's just your defense strategy tells you need to stand out in an exclusive sort of way that separates you from others. But it's not the desire of the 4. It's when the wounding has become entrenched and the 4 feels that's the only way they can make their life seem okay. And it's not even intellectual then either, actually. It's just an automatic thing that happens. Thank you.
We're already feeling the shame of not experiencing the happiness that we should feel for somebody, especially if somebody we care about. So then if somebody points it out, you're probably going to get the other side of 4 because then they're not going to want to let go of that, I didn't get this. So yeah, it's a piece that's often missed. And I just think it's important to.
And because it's so quick, it feels sudden. And the way I would explain it is the 4 emotionally with what's missing can go from 0 to 10,000 in nanoseconds, not even a second, just whatever measure, just as quickly as the system can do that. So it's very hard for the 4 to learn to slow down responses. Or if they do go to what's missing for them is to have a repair attempt where they go, oh, I'm so sorry. I really am happy for you. And I don't want to take away from your experience, but I'm just hardwired to become acutely aware of what I haven't gotten that I really wanted or worked very hard for. And I think with all the types, the repair attempt is an enormous piece of it. Patty, is there anything you'd like to share?
I would say that I think it's attached to, it's another facet of the what's missing conversation, that the intensity of our, I'll speak for myself, of my ability to be focused on myself and my internal landscape, which often includes what's missing, is such a huge part of being selfish enough to be able to do what I do. And not just live my life, but my work. And that without that kind of selfishness, it's not possible to create anything, really. And so the power is in the what's missing part, I think. And And my husband, who I'm really close to, understands that so well, since he's seen me, what I have to do in order to create something.
That's a great way to say it.
He sees it. But I also would like people to know that I can turn that focus to anything, to a relationship, or if I were a therapist, to a client, or anything. It doesn't have to be art, but I can turn that focus and that intensity and awareness of my own experience to another object outside of myself, and it can be a very satisfying experience. So
that's really what Fauvre's report. Thank you so much for mentioning that, because it's where the attention goes and what you're devoted to, you actually work very hard at. And the whole heart center is in the state of doing. I have to laugh because gut types were thought of as the doing types because they're physical, and head types were thought as doing types because they have to keep busy so they don't have anxiety, and heart types are thought of as the doing types because they're emotionally feeling things and then acting on their emotion. So different times over the unfolding of the Enneagram in the last 50 years, that quality has been addressed. But for the heart types, going into action, and for in particular, rather than staying in the head or the emotions, is very hard, that they have to be brought down to the physical level for creation to actually manifest. And that most really great artists and intellectuals, and I didn't say the 4 is the sensitive intellectual, are people that could really study themselves or their feelings and then create something that can touch other people, because they've kind of gone into the collective unconscious with their emotion, but it's maybe individualized for that creative person, but it touches everyone because it's in its raw form, it's universal and essential. So I really appreciate you mentioning that, Patty. Thank you very, very much. Well, thank you, everybody. I really, really appreciate giving more dimension and understanding to what the 4 is actually feeling, because an undue amount of 4 has been focused on a lack of productivity or too much emotion or too angry, and that's just behavior. That is not what's going on in the internal world, and every Enneagram type faces those stereotypes. So thank you for helping me explain more about what's really going on with the 4. Thank you all. Next will be next month. I'm doing the 6s, and then thereafter I'm doing a panel actually on the 4, 7, 8, so that people can see a tritype. They want to see a panel of a tritype, so no problem. That will be provided in December, I believe. Yeah, next month are the 6s, and then on to the tritype. And then I'm going to finish the rest of the types next year. So thank you all. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Katherine.